Hello there and welcome to Marketing Room 101, the podcast where I invite marketers to join me for a good old rant and I give them the chance to banish one thing from the industry forever. I'm your host, Ben Norman, and in this episode I'm joined by a guest who I've been especially excited to speak to because I've been applying his work and his thinking on a daily basis in my own work for the past couple of years. Ulli Appelbaum is a brand strategist based in the US, originally from Germany, who has worked everywhere in between, from Cameroon to Hungary, and he's done so in some of the most creatively renowned agencies like Fallon, BBDO and Leo Burnett. 12 years ago, Ulli brought this experience and variety to bear when setting up his own consultancy, First the Trousers, and has in that time also written perhaps two of the most practically useful and scientifically credible books on brand strategy I've ever read, the Brand Positioning Workbook and The Science of Brand Associations. What I love about speaking to Ulli is that he has the clarity and freedom of somebody entirely liberated of corporate nonsense. Or to put it plainly, he sees straight through the blurred sin that often plagues the marketing world. He's interested in what actually makes brands grow, not what's fashionable in marketing, and in evidence over opinion and in practical application, not just posturing on LinkedIn. So strap in for all of that and much more in my conversation with Ulli Appelbaum. Ulli, welcome to Marketing Room 101.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Very excited to be on your podcast.
Thank you. No, thank you for coming on. So, Ulli, now you are in Marketing Room 101. Can you please set the scene for our listeners? What is it like in here, inside Marketing Room 101?
As a desired room I'd like to be in, or my nightmare room? Which one do you want?
This is the nightmare setting, unfortunately.
Okay, so my nightmare would be in a really trendy, classy room with a lot of really cool, trendy young people that are dressed very trendy, that, have trendy pauses, that drink trendy cocktails. So basically, whether the sort of like the crowd in Oakland here in the United States or Brooklyn, outside of New York, and that see themselves as the crafters and the shapers of what advertising to the world means, even though they're completely detached from the world. So that would be for me the nightmare scenario.
So these are the people who think or believe that they should be setting the trends as opposed to mirroring real life.
Correct. And these are the people that ignore that, let's say, in a market like the United States, but I'm sure it's the same in the UK, is that a big chunk of the population is, rural outside the big cities and are very down to earth. So not everyone is chasing after the latest iPhone. Not everyone is chasing after the latest fancy cocktail out there. A lot of people stay away from that, but you need to understand those people. So, yeah.
So if that's your nightmare, where would you rather be?
To be honest with you, I'd rather be, so I live in the United States, and I'd rather be in a diner somewhere along a beautiful road and talk to the local people in that diner. And those would be families and, the waitress that has been working there for like 25 years. But that would be the place where I'd feel more comfortable and willing to have conversations with people, even if people are not, different from me in terms of their political orientation, interests and stuff like that. That's where the fringes are of where you start to learn things that are, not familiar to you. So that's the part that I would be excited about.
I love that. I don't do this all the time because I think it would be very bad for my health if I did, but sometimes if I'm working on a brief, I will sit and I'll work on it in the pub, in just a really normal, down-to-earth English pub. But just the people that you see and the conversations that you hear can sometimes just spark a little bit of inspiration rather than being in somewhere, like you say, that's super trendy or even in the office surrounded by people who don't really represent the real world.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Ulli, I first discovered you when I heard you speak on Douglas Burnett's brilliant marketing book podcast. What caught my attention was hearing that in your book, the Brand Positioning Workbook, you'd managed to create a definitive list of 26 ways to position a brand. I'd never heard anybody say that before. I'd never heard anybody say anything similar before, that actually, guys, there is a list of ways to position a brand, as opposed to just, some kind of loose fitting ideas of how you go about it. Now, I've read quite a lot of very good and a few not so good books about brand positioning, and I'd never heard anybody boil it down into something that is so practical and so definite. How did you create that list? And how did you know when it was complete? Why was it not 25? Why was it not 27 kind of sources of brand positioning?
Great question, and thanks for the compliment to have a pragmatic book on positioning, because that was exactly the objective. So I'm an empirical guy. I'm a very practical guy. So I use theory, I use science, I use tools if they help me in my day-to-day job of, developing strategies for my client. If they don't help me, I discard them fairly quickly. And in the case of the first book, the Brand Positioning Workbook, there wasn't any theoretical or conceptual framework behind it. What I literally did is I started to collect case studies, whether it's IPAs in the UK, whether it's FEs, all these kind of case studies of effective brand building or effective marketing. And I literally looked at the case study and said, oh, what do they do? Or they focus on a country of origin platform. So country of origin is going to be one bucket. And I stopped, so I continued. And now the process took me 15 to 20 years. So it's really a long process. And I've always been a student of case studies. So eventually, and there was like a 1,200 plus, I didn't come up with any new territory. I felt like I have my 26. Now, we could argue whether it's 25 or 27. I mean, but I could take one and slice it in 1 or 2, and then we have 27, but it's still the same territory. So that's when I decided, okay, I'm at 26. The 26 can be combined. So it's an unending list of potential solutions. So it's not limiting at all. On the contrary, it opens up tremendous possibilities. And at the beginning, when I launched this philosophy, I was even as arrogant as to say, I'd be willing to give $1,000 to anyone who comes up with a 27th, angle or source of brand association. No one ever came up with anything, so that saved me the money. But that's how confident I was. So it's really just a pragmatic, empirical, going through case studies until I run out of new territory or bucket I could identify. And then I decided, okay, 1,200, I think that's substantial and enough case studies. I don't need to go any further. So that's how I came up with it. Very boring, very linear, very pragmatic way to get there.
I understand that you didn't sit down and think, I'm going to write a book called the Brand Positioning Workbook. You'd essentially developed this methodology. Did that all come about before you then put that into thinking, right, this is a book and I'm going to use this to help other people take it away and work with it?
Yeah, I like to say that I put the cart before the horse. So this is a methodology I've worked with, or I've developed and fine-tuned over the 30 years I've been in the business. And as a strategist, you do a lot of workshop, you do a lot of strategy, positioning work and stuff like that with clients or with internally. So this was really a compilation of my experience together with this observation that there are a limited number of sources of associations, brand association, the 26, that if you explore them systematically when you develop a brand positioning platform, you get to strong results faster and you have more diversity in the options you have at your disposal. So for me, it's a battle-tested thing. So when I started my own business in 2014 here in the U.S., initially, I put all the content online for free. So literally, you could go to my website and get all the maybe 60% of the content of the book for free. But unfortunately, that was the time when the world switched to mobile phone and no one wanted to read long body content. So then I decided, okay, I still need to market my services. So I'm going to create these method cards. So I took the 26 principles, boiled them down into 26 method cards, each card describing the principle with questions that are meant to inspire you, and started to use that as marketing material to reach out to prospective clients. That was really the idea behind it. But they started to become so popular that I decided to put them on for sale. Yeah. So it's basically my marketing material that became so popular that I decided to sell it as opposed to give it away. In hindsight, I actually learned that, and I've stopped giving away my stuff because I've learned that if I give it away, people don't value it. If they purchase it, they value it. It's kind of weird. And then, so that has been going on since 2014. And then I realized, okay, so this has been going on. People love it, but I never really explained the methodology behind those cards. Those cards were never meant to be a product on their own. They were meant to be a teaser. Then COVID hit. That's when I decided to use the time I had to write the book about the methodology behind the card. So that's what I mean is technically the book should have come first, the card second, but I just happened to go the other way around. That's why I call it a workbook, because it just describes my methodology that I developed over 30 years that works for me, that has worked for many, many people out there. So that was the objective behind it.
Yeah, and I've used since I discovered this, I've used it with a couple of clients in the past year or so. And I think it feels a bit like cheating. If you're a brand strategist and you use your workbook, there's something about it that feels so practical, it almost feels like I'm cheating. So, yeah, I would encourage people to have a look because it's very, very intuitive to work with as a methodology. Now, when you were talking to Douglas Burdett about your book, you said it took you 20 years to write this book, so it would probably take another 20 years to follow it up. You've managed to actually exceed your own expectations by around 17 years. When you released your second book, The Science of Brand Associations, Win Minds, Win Markets, last year. And for me, this book, despite you thinking it would take 20 years and it actually took you 3, this book feels just as confident, practical and well considered as your first, but it almost feels like the scientific evidence to balance the practicality of the first book. Was that your intention here? And is it intentional that they kind of balance each other in that way?
So I love how you make it sound like all this is the result of purposeful actions and intent, whereas it's the complete opposite. So the first book focuses on what I call the 26 sources of brand associations. And basically, I introduced the concept of brand association without really describing it very much. And I'm a student of the art and the craft myself. So, the people I follow, the people that inspire me, all use this term brand associations, whether it's like large global market research companies that build their thought leadership model around brand association, whether it's, the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, whether it's Mark Ritson, all these sort of like marketing gurus I follow use the term. So because I mentioned brand association in my first book, I thought maybe I should dive into brand association a bit deeper. But I'm sure that many people wrote books already about the subject because it is so prevalent in the marketing world. So everyone mentioned it. And then I did a search on Amazon and realized there was not one single book that either had brand association in its title or that focused on brand association. Yeah. And then, my initial reaction was to think, maybe because no one is interested in the subject matter. But then I dug a bit deeper and I realized that there is a tremendous amount of science and a tremendous amount of data that supports the validity of brand association and that supports the role of brand associations. So the second book, while the first book is really a condensed summary of my own experience of doing workshops for 30 years, the second book is really the way I call it. It's a curation of the best-in-class thinking and research of brand associations. So to your point, yes, it's really the scientific foundation of the first approach, but it wasn't, I discovered this myself as I went through my own journey. And that's why I decided to write the book, because I realized, one, no one wrote anything about it, but two, there is so much knowledge already. So the only thing that is personal in the second book is maybe that all these scientific principles and data-driven marketing science principles are sprinkled with my own personal professional experience. So none of these are my theories or my beliefs. It's pure science, pure facts, wrapped in a bit of Ulli storytelling, to put it this way.
I think you're always quite humble in the way that you talk about your books as just a collation of what's already out there, as opposed to being your opinion or your view or your take on it. I guess that is intentional in that I've heard you describe other books or a lot of other thought leadership as essentially being opinion with some data or some evidence to support an opinion, whereas you seem to come at it from the other side. Is that the way you sort of see that? You come at this from, I'm going to look at the science and evidence and then bring that to the reader, as opposed to taking an opinion and then trying to evidence it.
Yeah, I wish I could say again that was a purposeful choice on my side. No, it's something I stumbled to throughout my career. So I started with everyone else, opinion, golden circle from Simon Sinek, cultural trends, being players in culture and stuff. But as I grew, as I learned, as I developed my own practice, I realized that there's a lot of science out there that no one uses. And the funny thing is that 6-7 months ago, I did a artificial intelligence analysis using ChatGPT, using Gemini, using Claude, using Grok. And I gave them, all of them, a list of like 20, 30 books that are popular in marketing, and asked them to rank them and map them based on their scientific validation and their application to the marketing world. And what you notice is that 95% of the marketing books that you and I read that are so popular out there are based on nothing but the author's opinion, storytelling, for which he or she uses a couple of case studies to post-rationalize his principles. There are very, very few books that are basically purely science or evidence-based. And I was happy to see that the Science of Brand Associations falls into that very exclusive group. So my practice and my thinking around marketing and brand building really that start with the science, start with the evidence we have. Just like my 26 sources of brand association are a starting point when you position a brand. Knowing the science and the data of successful brand building is a great starting point to analyze and develop a brand as well. And then you can always decide, that doesn't apply to that specific case, but instead of just making shit up or, to just doing great storytelling, focus on the science behind it and on what works. The principles that are shown to build brands successfully start with that. The funny thing is now that this is more the focus of my practice as well. I have several clients now that hired me for that very specific purpose. Is like, take this more scientific, data-driven angle. And you mentioned earlier playing with the 26 source of brand association for the positioning development feels like cheating. It's worth with the science of brand associations because you look at, let's say, 20 angles, 20 questions that determines whether your brand is going to be successful or not. You have such a shortcut onto what really matters. It's actually, I feel almost bad. I hope my clients don't listen to this to charge what I charge to my clients because I feel like I don't have to go through, 6 million questions because I know which 20 or 25 I really need to explore and find an answer to be able to reposition a brand or to give my opinion on what would make the brand successful. So it's just an evolution of my own work and my own interest over the last 25, 30 years.
Obviously, I don't want you to give away all the content of the book in here because I would encourage people to actually read it. But in the book, you introduce the idea that there are essentially 5 different sources of meaning of brand association. You talk about cultural, you talk about social, emotional, symbolic, and functional. Could you just introduce how you came to that and some examples of what you mean when you outline those 5 sources of meaning?
So again, it's nothing I came up with. It's the science of it. It's a lot of science to support all of that. So the social one is the most obvious one, right? We are social beings. So everything we do is social. So brands play an important role in a social signifier and who we are. So social has been a bit hijacked in typical example, Rolex. Rolex is a social status symbol. It's like gives the same time as Swatch does or as a Casio, whatever cheap Japanese brand you can find, but it's a status symbol. But then a next level, which is more and more popular, which really drives me nuts, is this sort of like cultural branding. Now, cultural branding is simply, for me, a subsegment of social, because what is culture is sort of like the set of behaviors and beliefs a small group of people share. That means it's a more narrow definition of a social environment. And, brands that are used for that is often every strategist now wants to be a cultural strategist. Every strategist wants to be a cultural player. Every brand manager wants to have their brand participate in culture, which I think is all BS. But that's a second example. A third one is simply a purely functional one. When you think about maybe Duracell batteries, or WD-40. The purpose of these products or brands, they became brands, is to provide power for the battery and to lubricate anything you can imagine that can be lubricated with WD-40. There is no meaning beyond that. They do a functional task, but they do it better than anyone else, and they're obsessively focused on doing that. So they build the equity around that, which for me would be sort of like a functional meaning associated with it. And what were the other two ones? See, you know them even better than I remember.
I believe symbolic and emotional.
Yes, so emotional, but that emotional is often has to do with brands that you have used, brands from your childhood, brands that remind you of better times, so that tap into these sort of like memories. So different ways to do it. But those are all, as I said, science-based theories on attitude formation, of self-image formation, and all these kind of things that are just the different meaning options that you have when you build a brand.
Well, what I like about this is that, just in that conversation then, so many brands overlook functional. And I've worked with brands in the past where they have a clear functional benefit. But because functional benefits aren't sexy anymore, they'll be chasing some form of purpose-driven or some form of cultural type meaning. And it's like, if you're a battery brand, it is okay to position yourself as the battery that lasts longer. It's madness not to sometimes.
And it's very much, and it's not a lifestyle brand, and it doesn't make you become a better person because you use that specific. No, you want power for your devices, and you want a battery that lasts long, period. You want the king in that category. And there's nothing, to your point, there's nothing wrong with that.
I think what's interesting as well is, and this is something that I think brands can maybe trip over, is the difference between using emotion as a source of meaning and brand association and using emotion as a communications tactic. You can aim to create functional meaning, right? But you can tell that in a way that's emotive. In the way you tell the story, you can do something that's funny, you can do something that's powerful. But I suppose it's important not to confuse the meaning that you want to associate with your brand with your communication tactics.
I think that's a great point. And I've spent countless hours in meetings discussing what type of emotion should be associated with a specific brand and functional benefit. What a waste of time. What science tells us is very simply that brands that trigger an emotional reaction are more likely to be memorized and remembered over a long period of time. Coming back to functional, there's a functional reason for why creating an emotional environment for your brand communication is valuable. It's because the imprint in your brain, in your memory, is stronger and lasts longer. So again, there's science behind it, but whether it makes you feel elated or self-confident or sexy really doesn't make a difference. And it's like a lot of research now in effective advertising, which is it's enough if an ad makes you laugh, because this emotional environment it creates makes it more likely for you to remember that brand. So yes, I think that actually emotions as a communication mechanism to strengthen the imprint of the brand is more important than trying to define, is it now self-empowerment or liberation or whatever else that you feel associated with your brand of yogurt or toilet paper, basically.
Yeah, it's always important to remember, isn't it? It is yogurt, it is toilet paper, it is a battery, Ulli, you came here because you wanted to banish something from the marketing world forever. So can you please reveal what you would like to banish?
So I would banish, in the broadest term, is vagueness and vague terms. And vagueness for me, they for category things like purpose, authentic, storytelling, cultural branding. Those are terms that really do not mean anything and therefore should be banned in the world of marketing and brand building, because marketing and brand building is often based on precision, but comfortable, right? So Ben, you and I are going to create a culturally relevant brand that authentically brings to life its purpose. 99% of people who listen to that will probably agree with my statement, even though I really literally didn't say anything. I didn't say anything on what we want to do with this brand. And yet people tend to fall back to these words because they're comfortable, because they make you feel like, oh, the guy uses contemporary vocabulary. He must know about modern branding. It's like, no, he knows how to bullshit his way through a meeting. That's what this person knows by using this word. So anything that is vague and unspecific, I would try to get rid of.
And is this more so in external communications and the way brands talk about themselves, or is this more in the way that marketers approach their? I guess it's both, right? Vagueness in all senses.
Yeah, it's both. It's like when I interview a marketing director who speaks about, focusing on the authentic self of the brand. You're like, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. So the torture test for me, especially for words like authenticity, is look at the opposite and see if the opposite makes sense. So what is the opposite of being authentic? Means basic fake, lying, cheating, bullshitting. So then ask yourself the question, what brand out there, what individual wants to be perceived as lying, bullshitting, not being yourself? No one wants to be seen like that. So stop using this word that doesn't mean anything. I want to be my authentic self when talking to you, Ben. It's like, what the fuck does that mean? It's like,
yeah,
I'm either myself or I'm not myself.
And surely it's table stakes. Yes. That's not positioning. It's a bit like when brands work on values and they say, our values are honesty, integrity, passion. It's like, okay, so what you want is hardworking people that aren't dicks.
Basically.
What specifically do you want other than that?
That's exactly right. And my exercise applies to that as well, because who wants to be dishonest? Who wants to be seen as lazy taking shortcuts? No one. So yes, it's ridiculous. But it's something our industry thrives on and loves to discuss and loves to use as words. Another example for me is like storytelling. We need to do more storytelling. Yeah, awesome. Now, the interesting thing is with storytelling, again, science shows you that a story organizes information, right? And usually wraps it in an emotional component. So the fact that this information is organized and wrapped emotionally makes it, again, easier to remember and easier to remember long term. So there is a science behind it. But emotional storytelling in itself doesn't mean anything. It simply means I'm going to share with you relevant arguments about the brand that I'm going to create brand preference in an engaging, entertaining, easy to remember word. So I just told you how I would do it. I didn't tell you what I did. And I didn't tell you what those storylines are. I didn't tell you how this emotion it's wrapped in is. I just told you I'm going to create a box that doesn't leak water and that's waterproof. Let's do that. You're going to say, yeah, that'd be great if my box is waterproof. So here we go. That's exactly what brand storytelling does.
Yeah, I think a lot of this smacks of tactics without strategy in many ways. It smacks of, okay, our strategy or our approach is going to be storytelling. No, that's a way you're going to deliver your strategy maybe, but where's the thinking before it? And I think if we think about vagueness as an idea, there are certain types of advertising that stand out to me, or certain types of comms, or certain types of brand. I think immediately of perfume and aftershave. I think of a lot of fashion, of automotive. I think a lot of it comes down to this lifestyle approach to brand building. Do you agree with that? Or, do you think there are any particular brands, whether you want to name them or not, or any particular types of brand that are guilty of this?
I think you have the sinners are in every category. So I have nothing against like fashion advertising or even high luxury brands. That's all about lifestyle, a mood, aesthetics and stuff like that. So it almost defies the logic of effective communication or brand building, but it works in its own way. You're not going to talk about the latest line of Yves Saint Laurent in a functional way. It's all about dreaming. It's all about selling this dream, so to say. Yeah. But you see that in every single category. The interesting thing, Ben, is I work with agencies through my clients. I mainly work with corporate clients nowadays, but often I get exposed to the work the agencies do. And all I can do is, if I still had hair, I would just pull my hair, because I'm thinking like,
that's where mine went to.
This is so much bullshit that is being presented here as creative ideas. So you can find it in any category. Or I've seen it in any category.
Interestingly, I think this is related. We recently lost a client to a very large agency network that has an office in Leeds. And I found out that essentially we lost the work to a strategic approach that used Simon Sinek's golden circles. And there's an aspect of that leads towards purpose-led positioning, but there's also an aspect that just leads to that vagueness that feels nice in a meeting, but there's nothing concrete there. And maybe this all comes back to that point of, I've heard behavioural scientists talking recently about the concreteness effect and how much more effective something is if it is concrete, if you can imagine it, if it's a word or a phrase or an idea that is tangible. And I think I'm with you. It links to vagueness. It links to intangible. But what I don't know is why it's so common. I don't know if you have any ideas on why you think marketers gravitate towards this.
So it's interesting. There is a study that shows that all these purpose-driven, or in the broader terms like value-driven communication, is the result of the attitude of the marketing and advertising people, not the result of the attitude of consumers. So basically advertisers and marketers feel like they need to have a better impact, feel like what they do is important. It's not just selling toothpaste, it's changing the world, even though it's selling toothpaste. And that sort of like shapes their desires. I think from an agency perspective, I think it's a mix between smart and lazy. Lazy in the sense that, and I'm guilty myself, right? When I was young in my career and we had to pitch a client and we didn't have much time and we didn't have much data about the client, the simplest, laziest thing to do is to come up with a purpose, because a purpose would always lead you up to something, emotional that is really hard to challenge. And the interesting thing is, from an agency perspective, a purpose-driven strategy allows you to do way more emotional, supposedly creative advertising, even though it's BS. But happy people changing the world, showing babies and dolphins and all that stuff. So I think from an agency perspective, it's both pragmatic, allows them to do better advertising, and lazy because they don't really have to come up with a strategy or do the work required to come up with a strategy. From a client perspective, and I think it's also from an agency perspective. So my theory, it's like crazy, but my theory is that because of the crumbling of the institution, because of the people moving away from religion, more and more people have the feeling or the need to be part of something bigger, to have the feeling that their contribution to the world is meaningful. Now, unfortunately, these people happen to work in marketing and advertising, selling toothpaste and toilet paper. But I think they're trying to project these need and these values to their actual business. So for me, the irony is, and I really have to hold myself back when I see this, because like a year or so, I saw someone, brand manager on LinkedIn, working for one of these plastic bottled water brands. Now, when you think about the damage that plastic bottles create around the world, it's absolutely mind-blowing. And so she was claiming her purposeful work by talking about the fact that the lid of the bottle is now 50% biodegradable. And she was therefore a better human being that was contributing to saving the world. And I'm like, are you effing kidding me?
It's 50% less bad for the world.
And of the lid of the cap, not even the whole bottle. And 50% less of a problem your industry has artificially created. It's like General Mills here in the U.S. selling sugared popcorn and has sold that for decades to American consumers, contributing to obesity with McDo and all these kind of things. Now say, our cereals now use whole grain. So for 50 years, you fattened the American population with sugary products, and now you continue to do the same with sugary whole grain product, and you call that purpose-driven brand building? It's like, what a joke. So anyway, I think it's people's need to be part of something bigger despite the category they're working in.
No, I'm with you, and I did read Simon Sinek's Start With Why a couple of years ago to familiarise myself with it, and it's just interesting the point you made about religion, because there is a point in the book that I found quite sinister where he makes the point that people will work harder, I'm paraphrasing, but they will work harder and for less reward if they think they're building a cathedral, not a wall. And there's something in that which I found quite sinister. Now, in terms of vagueness, I'm convinced on your argument to banish vagueness. Now, before you go, is there anything that you would like to bring back to the world of marketing?
Yes. Things I would bring back is the love for creativity and creative problem solving. And what I mean with that is, when I grew up, there were campaigns out there that were absolutely mind-blowingly creative. And you look at them and you think like, oh my God, this is so good. And I don't think I've had that feeling in the last 15 years in this industry. So it's both insightful, creative ideas, and it's both creative problem solving, where you look at something and, you see it, for example, reframed in a smart way where you think, yes, that is it's simple, but it's a beautiful idea. So I feel that the world could benefit a bit from the magic that comes out of, because it leads to magic, right? It's both a problem solved elegantly and a powerful creative idea is magical. It's bigger than life. It turns into something that, you look at it and you're just, wow. And it sort of like overwhelms you in a non-rational way. And you can almost not resist the power of an idea like that. And that's what I miss. Or I don't get exposed to that anymore.
Where do you think, and why do you think that magic has gone, or that you don't see it as much anymore?
That's a good question. I think there are a couple of things. I think marketing has become, and it's changing again, but marketing has become more and more transactional over the last 20, 30 years because of the internet, because of social media. Now I can do A/B testing, so I don't really need to use my brain to come up with a solution. I just test red versus blue and see which one scores higher. What I see with a lot of young strategists as well, or marketeers, the foundation is not there. And it's not their fault, but they just didn't learn the basics of marketing. And that translates very simply, when I started my career in advertising, it's like a long, long time ago, but, we would be sent for a week into another country for an intensive training session on communication, on negotiation skills. So I don't think companies invest in the knowledge of the skills of their people the way they used to do. And I think there is a trend towards also this belief that anyone can do everything, especially now. You are a 22-year-old and I'm a 45-year-old marketeer. I'm going to consider you as a social media expert, even though you probably
because
have no effing clue. That's right.
Yeah.
Because you use TikTok, and it leads to this inflation of ideas, which I think leads to a deflation of quality. So I just miss it, put it this way.
I think there's something in, and this is quite a specific area, but I think smaller businesses used to appreciate that to grow, they had to take bigger risks than bigger businesses. And I wonder if nowadays smaller businesses are more likely to think that the way to grow is by following the big brand's lead, which for me it's counterintuitive and it's the opposite, isn't it? If you want to grow with less money to spend than your bigger competitor in your market, the last thing you should be doing is copying their playbook.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I think that's a good point. And the interesting thing, we have the evidence that shows the opposite, but you're right. We tend to want to do like everyone else that we think is successful. And that's what I've noticed too, like throughout my career. I had an opportunity a couple of times to work for two competitors, one after the other. And the funny thing is each competitor thinks that the competitor knows something they don't. So they look at them to see what's the right thing to do. But then you realize they actually don't know it either. But I think another point that I've noticed, Ben, is I grew up in a time where you still had advertising or marketing personalities, where you had characters, where you had, whether it's the David Ogilvy, in my time also David Lubars from BBDO. Those are people that they're able to sell this type of creative ideas to their clients because of their skill set, because of their personality. And we don't have that anymore. I couldn't name one personality. I was lucky enough to work with Pat Fallon here in Minneapolis. When I started at Leo Burnett, I worked with some of the really strong people at Leo Burnett. And the funny thing is, they would talk about Leo Burnett like the dude was sitting in the room next door. To the point where after a couple of interviews, I once had to ask, sorry guys, I'm sorry, but I thought he died 20 years ago. It's like, oh yeah, he did. It's like, oh, okay, but you're literally talking to him like we're going to have lunch with him in 20 minutes, Wow. And I think we've lost the cult of these personalities that are able to come up with this outstanding work and sell it to their clients as well. I think we don't have that anymore. It's very, very much gone.
So I'm going to take vagueness from you and keep it here in Marketing Room 101. I'm going to give you a passion for creative problem solving back. So we're going to make that exchange.
Yeah.
Final question before you go is my brother's question. Every week, my brother sends me a question for my guest. My brother doesn't work in the industry. My brother this week wanted to ask you, Ulli, I understand you are originally from Germany. On a recent business trip to Wuppertal, I learnt about Tuffy the elephant that circus director Franz Althoff put in the city's suspended monorail as a publicity stunt. Is this something that you're familiar with?
No, I'm not.
Okay, I'll go on to explain because I wasn't until my brother sent me this. So Tuffy the elephant was put into the city's monorail as a publicity stunt, leading inevitably to Tuffy smashing through the carriage and falling from a window into the river Wupper. Tuffy survived but had minor injuries. Naturally, panic broke out, some passengers were injured, and the whole plan for publicity backfired. If you look back on your career, have you ever made any recommendation to a client that in hindsight is so ridiculous you don't know what you were thinking?
So the answer is yes, definitely. The problem with that is it's just like your bad sex experience, right? You put them in a box and try to forget about them. So it's really difficult to sort of like try to remember them. So I couldn't come up with a specific example, but the answer is definitely yes. But I couldn't tell you which one, to be honest with you. Not in the last 10 years since I've been running my own business, of course. It was all before that, but it was probably in Hungary. I worked for a year in Hungary and in Central Eastern Europe, and we did a lot of crazy, stupid stuff. And some of it was great, and some of it was just catastrophic. So it was probably in that time frame when I worked there.
Now, I don't know when Tuffy the Elephant was put into the monorail as a publicity stunt, but maybe this does link in with your last point in a very, very tenuous way about belief in doing things that are a bit mad, about creative problem solving. Now, that was a very, very bad way, but it backfired in many ways. But maybe that's because we were in a time and place in the world when people could come up with crazy ideas and they actually happened, as opposed to being in an era when things like that are taken off the table so quickly.
Well, I have actually looking that up as we're talking, and it's actually happened during the 50s. So how old is your brother exactly? Because that story is 70 years old.
Yeah, he's only 39, so I don't know how that happened. But he said he learnt about it when he was in Wuppertal, so somebody must have told him.
Well, I told you one of my crazy time was while I was in Hungary, was sort of like the wild east at the time when literally everything was possible. And I remember sitting in a meeting with a client, a beer brand, Amstel in Hungary. And at the time, there was also the CEO of the agency with us, so technically our boss, even though our bosses were in our headquarters in Germany. And the creative director had this brilliant idea, so you couldn't advertise beer on TV. So the creative director came up with the idea, well, we can't advertise the beer on TV, and we cannot show the beer on TV, but we can announce the launch of the brand on TV without naming it and without showing it. So, and the client got all excited about this, and it's like, oh yeah, here's a way to break the conventions, blah, 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 blah. At one stage, the CEO of the agency runs out, goes into his office, comes back like some kind of like legal document, opens the book, and then, says, hey guys, this is illegal. We can't do that here. So here's the CEO of the ad agency trying to kill the idea the creative director shared with the client. And luckily, the client loved the idea so much that he said, you know what, if that is like we're in this gray area of law where we don't advertise the beer, we advertise the launch of the beer. So they did it eventually. But that was for me like an example where literally you shoot yourself in the foot, as an agency when you have a great idea because for whatever stupid reason, you don't believe in the power of a strong idea.
And the power of a loophole. That's creative problem solving at its finest,
and
right?
A loophole. Yes.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. And I said it was my creative partner who came up with that. And they did it. And, it got coverage and all that stuff. It worked really well. But it almost died because of our own boss trying to kill the idea in front of the client. It's like, thank you very much. What were you thinking?
Yeah, thank you for that. Great. Okay, so Ulli, I've really enjoyed speaking to you. Now, can you let people know if they want to get in touch with you, how can they get in touch with you? How can they get hold of your books?
Well, thanks for asking. So the best way to reach out to me is through LinkedIn, Ulli Appelbaum. Just you'll find me or just Google me and my links will pop up automatically. The books you can be found on Amazon. And one thing I did recently, I started with the brand positioning workbook. I'm going to do that in the next few weeks with the brand association book. I shortened it a bit. So I took out all the fluff and focused on the core concept and translated it in 5 languages. So now it can be available in anything from Hindi through Portuguese, through Spanish, through French. I just wanted to make it more available to more people around the world.
Amazing. Thank you, Ulli.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me on your show. And great question. Enjoyed the conversation with you.
And you. Thank you.
So that was my conversation in Marketing Room 101 with Ulli Appelbaum.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it as much as I did, I'd love it if you could please share it with just one other person who you think would like it too. And if you've done anything recently you feel guilty about, for example, if you've been watching the highlights of every World Cup match instead of doing any housework, but then pretending you've had a really busy day at work, then you can cancel out that bad karma in just 30 seconds by giving Marketing Room 101 a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, if you'd like to get in touch with me, perhaps to tell me how much you love this episode, or to get the address for fan mail or any other gifts, just find me, Ben Norman, on LinkedIn. I'm the bald one.